Ohio gozaimasu. My name is Jack Chapman. My license plate on my truck says Koi Jack. I'm a retired Navy brat, and I spent 5 years in Japan where I caught the koi virus, and I've had it ever since. So I get a little long-winded about the subject, and I hope not to put too many of you, or if not all of you, asleep in the next few minutes. First of all, in September of '99, the Koi Club of San Diego, in association with the Japanese Friendship Gardens, built this beautiful pond back here. And it is, they brought the Feng Shui people in, and it is actually in the shape of a turtle. That's the turtle shell in the center. And the club was involved in somewhat of the design of the pond. The pond, basically speaking, I was asked to talk about the pond a little bit, which is why I'm doing this, is basically 12,000 gallons. And while you see 8,000 gallons of water over here, the toilet for the pond is roughly 4,000 gallons. And it has to be maintained. If any of you all are thinking about a pond and having fish and that sort of stuff, you might, when we get back to meetings and what have you, you could come to one of our Koi Club meetings that we have once a month, and you could get a little feel for whether you really wanted to do this or not. What you don't do is don't go buy a fish. come see us first. But we come here, the club, and the club members, and there's several of us, and we come and we flush the commode, if you will, and clean out the thing once a week, and that's why we're here today. And in the winter months, we're changing out 1,000 gallons a week, and in the summer, when it gets a little warmer, we're changing out 2,000 gallons of water a week. Why do we do this? In the pond, when the fish swim around, they breathe just like we breathe for us. When they exhale ammonia. It's equivalent to when we breathe and we do carbon dioxide. And the same thing that carbon dioxide does to us, ammonia does to them in their gills. So the ammonia in the water needs to go to the filtration system. And that's where the nitrogen cycle gets involved. Now, I will not explain the nitrogen cycle to you at this time, because then I'm really going to start to lose you. But it takes out the ammonia, and the end results of the nitrogen cycle leaves a little nitrate in the water. And that's what we do once a week, and we want to keep the ammonia down so it doesn't burn the fish's gills. We currently have 24 fish in the upper garden, and of the 24 fish right now, about 22 of them are actually show quality fish. This is a good place to come see the actual possibilities of all the different kinds of koi. This is a good representation. A couple years ago, somebody was visiting the Japanese gardens from Texas, and they were koi lovers, and they they communicated to the Japanese Friendship Gardens that this pond was the best public display of koi that they had ever seen, and they'd been all over the United States, and that definitely made my day, I can assure you, and the garden was pretty happy too. During this segment, I've been asked to maybe talk a little bit about the Nishigi koi, which will now be called koi, and what you might want to be thinking about if, in fact, you were going to think about having a koi garden. First of all, a koi pond, basically speaking, has just the koi like this, and you don't see any plants and what have you. When you do that, then it becomes a water garden with fish. It's not that you can't do it, it's just a little more difficult. We call koi water pigs, and they eat. When they're awake, they eat and they grub. They can actually pick up rocks and move them around on the bottom and what have you. For a beginner in a koi pond, people have written articles for years, and the basic color and the collection, when you look at a koi pond, it's considered to be best if, in fact, you have a little more red in color than you have anything else. Now, when you talk about koi, you could have somebody come talk to you about dogs, cats, birds, any animal, and all those little intricacies about those hobbies, trust me, the koi hobby has the same thing. So you can build a pond in your backyard, and you can have regular koi that you actually could go down to PetSmart and you can buy for for $10, for $15 or $20, and you can have a small pond in your backyard where you can have your beer, your glass of wine, your soda, and you can enjoy it to the absolute maximum. The other end of the extreme, where you find myself, is I'm looking for show quality fish. That's what we have in the pond here, and I take my fish to koi shows and compete for grand champion, all that other sort of stuff, and all the awards and what have you. So I am going to spend a little bit of time in that regard. Koi go back a long way, over a couple hundred years. The oldest koi on record is 224, 225, depending on which article you read, and it was a quite old fish. The three fish that are considered to be the royal family in koi are kohaku, and that's a fish that is just red and white. A sanke, and a sanke is a red, white, and black fish, but there's no black on the head, and the black is small spots. And showa, which has more black, but it's red, white, and black. Now, sanke and showa, well, believe it or not, there were eras in Japan with those same names. So every time they changed the emperor in Japan, the Japanese and the breeders, they get together and they try and create a new koi, and they want to name it after that era in Japan. There you get the Showa, and that sort of stuff. We had a renaming of a fish, and a Yamada Nishiki became a Heisei Nishiki for the Heisei era in Japan. So we have that connection with the royal family. Also, I don't know if it's actually come across, but we have a tancho in the pond, and that is an all-white fish with a red dot, just like the Japanese flag, right between the eyes, and it's in a perfect circle, and that is a very popular fish. But those three fish, which I call the royal family, and they're really called gosankis, they win the majority of awards at koi shows and what have you. But then we have 12 other varieties, classifications. In varieties, there's over 300 different varieties, where you take that red and white fish and you give it one red patch, two red patch, three red patch. Each one of those is its own separate variety, and a gosanki would be one with 5 separate red spots. If you're elderly or you're young and you've never seen koi, and you walk up to a koi pond and you're asked which one do you like the best, generally speaking, the yellowfish wins. The big yellowfish wins, and that's just one of those crazy facts that we have about the pond and the fish. Also, there are fish in the pond generally that have scales, and we have a fish that basically came out of Germany, and it doesn't have any scales, and it's called a doitsu. Now, the Japanese had problems pronouncing the R's, what have you, and that's how it came out to be called doitsu. Now, the fish came to Japan not because it was a koi, but because it was easier to eat, which is why they were raising them in Japan that way. It was a carp, it's a food fish, and it didn't have any scales, so it didn't have to be scaled. But then they found it with some colors, and that was pretty good. In the beginning for koi, the story goes that there was a couple of kids, and the carp were raised in the rice fields, and they ate the carp, but they had a couple of carp that actually had some red coloring, and some Japanese children liked them, and they kept those fish. They didn't eat them, and they brought them in to their home and kept them over the winter. And then those koi had fish, and now we're 200 years later. from that beginnings to what you see in the pond today. The fish that I think that you're seeing now coming up, that is all orange with the black spots, that's called a mizuho, and that's one of the newer fishes, and that's a very nice representation of that fish, and it's one of my favorites. The spotted one down at the bottom is a kujaku. The black speckled one is a beko. Generally speaking, that is a sanke from the royal family. She's right there in the center of the picture. When you're thinking about buying them, yes, you can go to Petco. Yes, you can get a koi for $5, $8, $10. When I go to the dealers in Southern California and what have you, I start looking at fish at around $200, $150. I look at those, but on my last trip and looking for new fish for this pond right here, I was looking at fish that were $4,000, $6,000, $7,000. I don't buy them, but they're there, and if you got the pocketbook, they can be had and they can be yours. The big koi show is the All Japan show, which is held in February of every year. The process of selecting a koi. All right, first of all, I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. Number one, you look at the fish. You like the fish. Then you can buy it. And whatever I say beyond this doesn't matter to a hill of beans. If you're looking for showfish, it's a totally different story. But at $25 a pop, you like the fish, you buy the fish. Now, at the other end of the extreme, for a showfish, and what you're number one, I'm looking for a lady. I want a female because the females are larger. They look like a torpedo. Males are thinner. After age 3, they don't compete as well in the shows. They don't win. They can be more beautiful, like male species in a lot of animals can be, as opposed to the other. But in koi, the ladies went out, especially beyond the age of 3. Just like if you're buying a rabbit, a horse, whatever, the body conformation and all the issues you can have with those land animals, trust me, the deficiency list for koi is about 3 pages long with pictures. So you have to, the fins have to be the right size. They have to be look the same. There's symmetry. Your fish has to have the symmetry. The koi's head is extremely important, so that when you judge a koi, conformation wins over 50% of the award. Then the actual color, and then thirdly and lastly is the actual pattern. So that's what the judges look at when they're judging a koi. In the red and the white fish, there's a thing called the edge of the scales. When you have the scales, and that's called the sashi. And the front sashi, or the front part of that plate, you get a white scale over a red scale. So you get this little white with the red underneath, and that's called sashi. And that has to be equal, or not there. On the back end of the scale, on the kiwa, which is the back end, but it's all of the scale, there has to be no sashi on the back side. And this, they write books, and there are people a lot more knowledgeable than me about this. Just the red color on a kohaku, they write books about. In the hobby, they say you get into the hobby and you like kohakus, you like red and white fish, and then early on you wander away from kohakus and you go to all the other beautiful fish and everything else. But it's someday you will return to kohakus. For the final and third segment, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I'm an advanced koi health advisor So I take care of sick fish and what have you. So I thought I'd like to spend a little bit of time about some of the things you might expect in regards to the health of your koi. There are two things that are paramount. Number one, it is your water quality, and that goes beyond just clarity. And there are 4 or 5 things that you need to be testing your water for weekly to maintain so that you don't cause disease and illness. The single most important thing, and maybe one of the hardest things to wrap your brain around, is the word stress. There is this book of Mother Nature, and if you do this and this and this, then this is what's going to happen to your fish. And it happens on somewhat of a regular basis. You need to look at your koi. When you feed your koi is a really good time to look at your koi. Koi are cold-blooded fish. The temperature of the water is the temperature, basically, of the fish, generally speaking. And that's important. Their feeding habits, they are a 4-seasonal fish. I've been known to explain koi as a balloon filled with air and hormones. And the fish does whatever its hormones tell it to do. The environment tell the fish's hormones what to do. The fish actually are affected by the position of the sun in the sky and the amount of light. That's part of the seasonal change. The physical temperature of the water, in fact, is as they go through these seasonal changes. And you treat your fish differently and you feed your fish differently in all 4 seasons. And I won't bore you with that part of it. A fish should get larger and a fish should weigh more each year. For the first 7, 8, 9 years, your growth. You're looking for growth. You're looking for color improvement. They go through changes. We call them toe size when they're really young, but we have children, if you will. We have teenagers, we have adults, and then we have older fish, and they all have different changes that they go through. In the fish's health in the pond, some of the things that they can be subjected to, in fact, are parasites. Parasites that you can't see. There are a few like fish lice, anchorworm. You can physically see them on your fish. But a lot of them are parasites that you cannot see. The fish, just like me and you have skin, fish have slime coat. And slime coat is the first barrier. And basically speaking, when a parasite comes up and it hits that slime coat, that's just about it. It doesn't infect your fish. But this fish goes along and it flashes and rubs itself because it's got an itch against a rock, against the bottom, against a pipe in your pond or what have you. And he breaks the actual slime coat. Now that same parasite now goes right on top of the scale. And he attaches, makes babies, and starts to eat your fish. And oddly enough, we call this ulcer hole in the side. And your fish gets a hole in the side. And it needs to be treated. And you need to, my club members will call me. You can actually take your fish to a vet. You can go to a veterinarian and do it. Or you can treat the fish yourself. And I'm not going to go into the treatments, but parasites are a big thing. Like a lot of pets and what have you, the one thing that I tell people about a lot is the behavior. The behavior of koi will tell you 80% of all the problems that you will be experiencing and what have you. They are very social animals. They school together and what have you. When you have a koi separate itself from the herd and go set on the bottom with its fins in, it ain't happy. There's something going on. It's one of the things you need to look for, and then you need to take a closer look at that fish. When you observe koi, when you have a fish do that, you will have a couple of your other fish in the herd. They'll actually go over and check on him. How you doing, Joe, Sally? Not feeling too good today. Okay, hang in there. See you later. And they're gone. But they'll actually do that. They will. It's called flashing. If you have an itch, you take your hand and you scratch it. A fish doesn't have hands, but it does have the side of the pond, and it will flash against it. If the water temperature changes 5 to 7 degrees, they'll start to flash, and that's just from the water temperatures. There are a couple of viruses which there isn't any treatment about, but there are, and there's a really, really bad one called KHV, and there's actually one even worse. So there are viruses, there are parasites, there are internal injuries. They do get lumps and bumps, ulcers, and all sorts of things. They actually get tapeworms kind of thing. They get worms inside their bodies and what have you. So we have those kinds of things. They get fins. They get problems with their fins, and they get infections with bacteria on where they've been injured and that sort of stuff. So you really have to look and watch your koi. And I think for an introduction to the koi cell, water quality and watch your koi.